Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Way Through. I am your host, Bonnie Worth. Of course, this show is all about exploring the mind body spirit connection through the lens of mediumship, the metaphysical context of ontology, which, of course, is our state of being, and conscious co creation, which means as a means of way of to navigate our life's challenges, to become more conscious in our very existence, to unravel all the conditioning and all of those things that come up for us, both personally as well as collectively, the things that keep us stuck in the past, the repeating of cycles and patterns and habits, and how we can realign our lives and how we can begin to become more consciously convicted in our pursuit of what is ease and joy and well-being in our life. Today, I'm incredibly honored to share in conversation with the esteemed psychologist and astrologer, a dream interpretation expert, Dr. Michael Lennox. Our discussion today is really going to center around how it is that we transform not only our personal wounding, but understanding those soul lessons that are embedded within it, the wisdom that exists there, and how it is that in being conscious and attentive to our own wounding, that it really becomes these opportunities for greater connection, empathy, and our collective resilience. I just feel this is such an important conversation in light of everything happening in the world, both personally and collectively. We're being invited to show up more fully, more consciously, to honor these sacred invitations for our own personal healing, but what is our existence beyond the confines of the ego. And so today, my greatest hope in this conversation is that, this is going to be inspiring, to give you the courage, the openness, and to recognize that our shared experiences can also foster healing and connection for the collective and a deeper understanding of, much more compassion for each other, for the human condition that we are all finding our way through. Today, of course, Michael is on the show with us. Hello, welcome, Michael. I'm so grateful and thankful for you to be here today.
I'm really excited to be here. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome. You're welcome. So really want to begin to let people kind of get to know you a little bit
Mm,
of what has brought you to not only our conversation today, but what inspired you to pursue your
mm.
career as the astrologer, as the dream interpreter,
Sure,
as
sure.
this with the psychologist, foundation.
Well, first and foremost, that introduction, talking about your sort of vision, your consciousness, why you do this, but that ditto,
Yeah.
like ditto. That's every word you said. I'm sitting here going, yep, 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 yep. So one of the things that's important to say, because we're talking about wound and how wound really drives us to our life purpose if we work with it, is that I was raised in an empirical consciousness. My mother was a scientist at heart, and unambiguously negated anything about God, connection, intuition, perception. And I'm this little intuitive kid who's like seeing things that other people are missing and getting things on a level that I can barely understand in my consciousness. But that push of my mother shutting down any impulse that came out of me that spoke of my intuitive perceptions wounded me beyond recognition. But because of that, I found my brilliance in living consciously. Like that, I am a pearl from the sand in my oyster. And it was a rough journey. There was a lot of
Yes.
violence and chaos in my house. But because there was that pushback and I had to shut down my emotional body to survive in my home with my very sort of chaotic and difficult mother and father, I shut down enough such that my natural curiosity of healing and embodiment got started in my teen years. I
Wow.
went to therapy on my own steam. Then my intuitive curiosities, I was no longer interested in my mother's negation. So I bought
Yeah.
my first tarot deck at 15, 16 years old and started being
Amazing.
amazed at what would happen when I would play with these cards and get sort of this intuitive. I read Freud's interpretation of dreams because it showed up on my mother's shelf in high school. And so I would go to school and kids would say, I had this crazy dream. And I'd be like, well, tell me what you dreamed. I want to hear about it. And had things to say. That later on in my life, I understood that there was a gift that I had. The gift was there as a kid. My mother squeezing it helped me need to follow it in a kind of a rebellious, independent sensibility. And so I moved 3,000 miles away to Los Angeles. I was born in New York, mostly so that I didn't live in the same time zone as my mother. And we were able to have a relationship that worked because we were thousands of miles away.
Yes.
So the to wrap the very long story up is that while I went off on a creative, like I was a writer for a while, I worked in the entertainment industry and the business side of things, I was always doing my spiritual work on the side. So that by the time I was 28 years old, I'd hung a shingle in Los Angeles. I'd done some workshops in yoga studios, and I had my first paying client who sat down and paid for my ability to hear a dream and respond to it.
Wow.
Now, life would have me sort of trek in the business side of things for another 10 years or so. But somewhere in like that middle age, late 30s, I just went to grad school. I was like, this life is not working. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't want to be a therapist, but I need to know more about the human experience.
Yeah.
And so that education led me to start coalescing, doing some sort of a career helping people. And there was a little TV show that came up in 2002 and 3, and I developed the show on the Sci-Fi Network that was ultimately canceled after 3 months. But that act of being sort of presented to the world as an expert in dreams told me that I could live an entire life teaching and helping and healing through dream interpretation, astrology, intuitive. And then, so I got a master's and a doctorate in psychology, so that when I got to the juicy part of my life in these last decades, I can teach people how to do shadow work and self-investigation from a psychological perspective, but with the spiritual underpinning, so that a person who works with me in those ways is experiencing exactly what your language was at the beginning, which is exactly my language, which is you're in this body. You can make choices in the body that come from your wounded spaces and just have a shit show of a life. Or you can dedicate yourself to understanding that the shadow inside of you in the most wounded places is just where the work is. Start listening and paying attention to that and be willing to feel difficult and uncomfortable feelings. And now I'm looking at the title of your podcast.
Right.
The way through
is
to say, okay, I'll sit with these wounded spaces. And in so doing, I'll learn who I really am. Not just the top of the wheel, but the bottom of the wheel too, where we are afraid and suffering and in separation consciousness. And so here I am living out the last chapter of my life, teaching and healing and helping through dreams, astrology, and psychology.
And I mean, you do a phenomenal job. And I'm so, you have, even just in the short amount of time that I've been aware of your work and, watching your broadcasts and listening to your podcasts and all of this beautiful work that you have out in the world, the level of understanding of my own self and really even backing up what, as I say in the beginning, what our conscious choices and how we are the makers of our reality. And irregardless of the things that have happened, the inherited conditioning, all of the reasons and excuses, that we can choose to stay in our suffering, or we can, take this opportunity to lean into the things that are painful and hard and difficult in order to transform and finally find a sense of wellness. And wellness, when I look at wellness, is mentally, emotionally, physically, as well as spiritually. That's a big component here. So I'm really curious, in all the years that you've been, doing this work and the conversations that you have with people, are there common threads in terms of what our wounding is within our human condition?
At the bottom of the sort of pyramid of that is ultimately worthiness, right? If there's a theme that I've seen in human beings is that we get born into this consciousness that's pure and fantastic and filled with potential, that is worth being cared for, loved, we value life in that way. So
Yeah.
that just by being born, there's a value inherent in I'm alive, I'm in a body, and I'm going to be cared for.
Mhm.
Yeah, but then ancestral, generational, challenges that go from parent to child to parent
Yes.
to child to parent to child become the crucible in which that small innocent child is raised and cared for. And so even there's, I think, two ways that wound gets attached to that perfection of worthiness. One is the wounds of ancestry and generational trauma passed from generation to generation, which isn't different from the second piece, which is the way you're directly wounded by your children. Your parents, parents wound their children because of how they were, raised and wounded themselves. But
Yes.
it really comes down, for my observations, that any disconnect from what the need and desire is of the little innocent being that doesn't get met in insidious ways turns into a sense of unworthiness. If I'm not loved beautifully, I must not be worthy of love. And
Yes.
so then we move out into the world sort of saying, well, I don't want to be unworthy. I'm going to shove that feeling into a place where I'm going to pretend it doesn't exist. And then the wound and the resistance to the wound is shoved down someplace. And the part of us that can do that is the body and fascia. The fascia in the body, which is that stuff in between muscle and tissue,
Yes.
that has two states: solid and hard, or soft and gel-like. Both, right? And so when we are traumatized as children, the fascia tightens and tightens and tightens, and then by the time you're living as an adult, your whole embodiment is expressing shoving down the unworthiness and the specific stories of unworthiness that were the childhood life unfolding.
Mm.
Well, who wants to go into that? That sounds like a horrible idea.
Right.
Isn't it a good idea to avoid that and be like, I'm
Right.
fine, I'm fine, I'm
It's just
fine?
easier to deny and suppress this than having to deal with this.
Right. But what we then know happens
Yeah.
is all of that shadow is not expressed just because it's shoved someplace where you don't have to look at it.
Mhm.
And where it seems to show up is out there.
Yeah.
I'm enraged, but I don't know that. So you do something to piss me off. So I cut your head off.
Right.
Well, you deserved it because you did that thing. But
Right.
the behavior of cutting somebody off in some way because they have offended you, at a 2 on the scale, but your reaction is an 8 on the scale. The challenge, the scary feeling is inside the person who's doing the reaction. This is the essence of shadow work, right?
Yeah.
And so it all thematically starts to sort of build a story of, if we don't look at the ways we're tightened and squeezed against saying yes to life, our unconscious no will be the thing that guides our behavior. And then we want to have a good, loving relationship and explore something, but instead we send that horrible text that ends it all because that came from the wounded place, not the,
Yes.
conscious embodied place. And so,
Yes.
yes, we're both in the business of helping people,
Right.
do that.
Right. And it helped exactly, and really kind of looking at being able to unravel the paradigms, the inherited, the generational
Yeah.
information that we have sitting in the unconscious, and being able to transform that into a way of going, okay, this isn't something that's happened to me. This has actually happened for me in some
Yes.
way. And
Yes.
it's for, and and we know that, of course, as we start to move deeper into the healing components of it. I'm really curious, in the sense of, if you can explain, there's a curiosity of explanation here, because I know that for myself, in coming forward into the astrological understanding of myself,
Mm.
in terms of how it related to not only my abilities and talents as a medium, and all of, this expressive work, this expressed work of that I'm called to do, but understanding my own personal challenges, and how and what the invitations were, according to Chiron, in terms of my wounding and things. But I want, just if you can explain for people
Yeah.
tuning in, how does astrology play in helping us to understand what those invitations are?
Great question. So let me answer it this way. The way we're wounded will show up in the chart. I mean, the chart is an extraordinary map of a person's psyche. And of course, most people don't only really know about sun sign astrology
Yeah.
out there. And then maybe they learn about their moon and their rising. Meanwhile, there's like a whole bunch of planets and a whole bunch of points. And Chiron specifically is that body that reflects our wounded experience. One of the things that's interesting to me that I've noticed also in observing human beings and their struggles is that there is almost always an exact readiness in the chart, and therefore the person, the child in question, to receive the wounding from the parents perfectly well. Like, okay, my chart. My Chiron is in the third house of communication. And then my Mercury, communication, squares my rising sign, square conflict, rising sign, how I show up, and my communication button, conflict, and wounds in communication. Well, my father had the nastiest tone of voice and said horrible things to his children over and over again throughout our lives. David was stupid, Kathy was fat, and I was my mother's golden-haired boy, and she was a whore.
Yes.
So I received this wounding in the same crucible that my sister and brother were in, but I inherited the nastiest tone of voice. That when I'm angry and critical, I'm articulate and sharp, and I will cut you to a quick. And the first 40 years of my life, you know, there's like I'd have to rent a hall to house all the people I had offended with my tone of voice.
Yeah.
So the point I'm making is that's in my chart.
Wow. Yes.
And I was raised in such a way that would cause me to subjugate my rage and have it show up in sarcasm and nasty tone of voice that took decades and decades to heal.
Yeah.
So that's something that I noticed, that astrology can look at the structure of your wounded psyche, and then the conversation with the human being that I'm sitting with can be one of forgiveness and release, so that there can be a sense of, oh, it's not their fault. Oh, it's not my fault. Oh, it was a perfect crucible, and my job and my karma is now to look at that.
Yeah.
Now, I could have blamed my father my whole life for having such a nasty tone of voice. Like his teeth are in that cabinet right there, his false teeth. Because I took them when he died and I did a ritual. I got a file in a ritual, and I filed down the bite of his teeth.
Wow.
To help me let go of all the ways that in my unworthiness and feeling like I wasn't lovable, my rage would come out as sharp and nasty tone. And so now the astrology chart helped me distance from the blame game.
Right.
Take some responsibility for not why am I like this, but what can I do to shift and heal this particular wound. And so that story is mine and only one of them. And I tell you, I've had thousands and thousands of experiences where we did just that.
Yes.
I can't tell you how often I've heard people say to me, oh my God, you mean I'm not out of my mind?
Right.
Oh, I thought all of this resistance in my life or breakdown is my fault. And it's like, no, it's just you're in a period where it's breaking down. Or someone will say, I don't know what to do. I feel so confused. What's wrong with me? And it's like, oh, Neptune, the confusing planet, is like just telling you this is a time you can't know.
Right.
You know, come back in 9 months, and if you still don't know, we'll talk about that. But they always know, because the Neptune transit passes and they move out of confusion into clarity. So that contextualizing that astrology offers helps a person more objectively, I think, go into who they are and examine the parts that are harder to love. But if they don't get love, then you can't be whole and complete.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And this is one of the reasons why I've fallen in love with astrology, even just in terms of my own, personal journey, and just looking at what those invitations have been, and a real big degree of self-acceptance and acceptance of what happened in the past, and my understanding of how to work with that and the choices that are being presented to me. So I've become, it's the ultimate, I think, in a lot of things, that I speak about and talk about through the work that I do. is this aspect of personal
Yep.
responsibility, that we have a
Yeah.
responsibility here. And I know people have often come, question that. How can you take responsibility for all those bad things that happened? I'm not taking responsibility for what happened. I'm taking responsibility for the choices I'm making now,
Yes.
irregardless of what's happened. That's the difference.
Yes. Well, and that difference puts your focus internally on self,
Yeah.
which is you are driving your body through your life. No one else is,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
looking at the story or the blame takes you out of the driver's seat,
Yes.
and then puts you back in, okay, how do I have to take responsibility for this?
Yeah.
If
And it
my
really keeps you
choices, yes,
it keeps you in victimhood. That's really otherwise
yes,
it does, right? And
that's
it's
right.
just yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is we're also where, looking at the astrological understanding of this impact of wounding, but it's also where the invitations are for our shadow work, as you've talked about.
Yeah.
And it's important for people to understand, and I know it was something I needed to really understand, how not only my personal healing was my responsibility, but it was also my contribution to the collective healing journey as well. I wonder if you can, kind of dive into that a little bit more
Oh,
to
honey,
really bring that to the
now,
table.
yeah, now you're talking my language of
Yeah.
like why I do what I do.
Yeah.
Like I'm very clear about this. The world has gone mad,
Right.
and I live in the United States of America, honey, which is one of the focal points of madness at the moment. Not the only one, but
Right.
um, I believe that everybody needs to be as activated as they possibly can to help make social change occur on the planet. I'm all about that from the larger perspective. The world needs to be ushered more efficiently into the age of Aquarius.
Yes.
And there's this big extinction grab happening where the old guard, the old way, the old world is trying to keep things the way they were. And we are moving into a world community where all humans are cared for. That's the promise of the age of Aquarius. And we do it through technology because that's the promise of the age of Aquarius as well. Aquarius invented technology. So I was raised by that crazy, violent, personality disordered ADHD mom. She was a loud activist. She had a big voice for and her favorite word was the F word. So it was, F this, F that, F the government, F managed care, F insurance, F.
Yes.
So I have this thing of, I will never be that. I will never, put my angry voice into the world. And it's not my nature.
Right.
It's not my nature to activate in that way. But I know who I am and I know what I'm capable of doing, which is I'm capable of very skillfully helping people find the wounds in their, psyche that are ready to be unraveled at that moment.
Yeah.
And there's this law of projection that we live in. The world is essentially a holographic illusion that is created by all of our perceptions of it. And the madness in the world is because we're mad. Our human psyche, can I curse? We're fucking like and that's, you could be the best person in the world and the most loving
Yeah.
and the most calm and you're still part of what the world actually is, which is breaking down. And it's because the projection of shadow collectively is way greater than a projection of love and inclusion. This is where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that's true and how we are in our inner life gets projected outward, and if it's also then true that a cleaner inside from wound exploration and understanding who you are, how you serve, and then doing that with your life is your individual part of the 7 billion of us that create this projection with each breath we take. So I can't change how, the government is operating in the United States of America, but I could teach 1,000 people a year to have less inner angst. So they're participating in a higher vibration as their 1/7 billion fractal of participation.
Yes.
So the fantasy of the age of Aquarius is that we get to a place at a certain point in our development where there's less shadow in individual bodies. So there can be a collective sense of inclusion and love and a world community that cares for our people because there's enough individuals on the planet expressing that. And we need our activists. We need our loud voices and our people who are out there doing that kind of work. I know my work is done right here in this chair.
Right, exactly, right. That's exactly it. We all have our role in terms of what that contribution to healing
Yes.
humanity is all about. And when we look at it, this becomes the conscious choices that we're making of how we're showing up, doing
Yeah.
our deeper work,
Yeah.
knowing it's contributing, but overall, it's also the very thing that is going to help to transform
Yeah.
what is the unconscious within our our human self as well. So,
I think it's really important to add to that this is true no matter how large your ministry is.
yes.
So say you fall in love with being creative in a crafty sort of way, and you don't even sell them. You don't have an Etsy shop. You're not looking to monetize it. You're just like, oh, I'm going to crochet my little napkin holder thing. That's contributing.
Yes.
So like when
Yes.
I see people, I attract a lot of people for astrology readings who are in my same world of healing presence consciousness. They are teachers and healers, and they have workshops, and in this world.
Yes.
And what I'm always fond of saying is, especially if the chart reflects real skill in that area, I will uplift their sense of that's who you are. You are a healing presence. Astrology can't tell you whether your ministry is one person, which is you in the mirror, or 10 people, or 100, or 1,000, or 10,000, or 100,000, or 1,000,000, or more. And so I imagine somebody who's watching this, who's not a spiritual teacher, who's not going to do shadow work for other people, and they'll hear what we're saying as like, well, that doesn't apply to me. I can't. But I'm saying what we're talking about is accurate and true for an individual in a body for their life. And if 6 billion of those 7 billion people were crocheting little napkin holders
Right.
and loving their life,
Yes.
we'd have peace.
Yes. Yes. Irregardless of
Irregardless of what you
action was
do, what action,
right.
yes, how big it is. Yep.
Yes.
And in
Yeah.
this world of I want to be famous today for nothing, we got to counter that
Yes.
a little bit.
Yes. Oh my gosh, so good, so good. And so when we look at here, one of the things your work really brings forward too is understanding our attachment style, as we're, what we're attached to, what we cling to, what we're in resistance of letting go. And I'm wondering, can we discuss this
Yeah.
a little bit to bring
Yeah.
this to the table as well?
Absolutely. I think I want to start with saying this, that I started creating a deep curriculum for shadow work back in 2020. I'd already been trying to crack the code of teaching online because I saw that's where things were going.
Yeah.
So I was trying to create things as early as 2018 for
Wow.
online teaching. So I created all of these classes in a flood of creativity in 2020, 21, and 22 into 23. But the attachment class that I just taught
Yeah.
was like 60 years in the making.
Wow.
Like that class, Healing Your Anxious Attachment, is, for me
Yes.
personally, sits in another place than all of the shadow classes and the fairy tale and myth explorations that I do in shadow work. It's juicy and yummy.
Yeah.
And here's why. This is why I love being a psychologist as well, because I learned all about this in grad school. So the theory of psychology, which is scientifically verified over the last 150 years, there's an understanding that at the breast, we would call it. So in that first 6 months of our experience, and there's a Melanie Klein is the psychologist who sort of created this idea that at 6 months, the relationship between mother and child, or primary caregiver and child, is one of oneness. The infant still feels undifferentiated from the womb, and now the womb is dry and a big place, but the infant still feels undifferentiated. And the mother who brings the breast, who's good, there's this other mother who doesn't bring the breast. She withholds it. She's bad. And at 6 months, Melanie Klein proposes that the child has a psychotic break when it realizes the good mother and the bad mother are the same mother, and they're not me. That's a psychotic break that creates the personality. And when that doesn't go well, you have a personality disorder. But mostly it's like, and this is what I love about Melanie Klein. She was like, you don't have to be great at this. She coined a phrase called the good enough mother.
Yes.
So for the listeners out there, I'm not talking about your cranky, depressed, anxious mother. Good enough, and many people, good enough, will have a sense of, so here's where the attachment comes in. That child is going to die without being cared for. So the attachment isn't like, oh, I like you, let's attach. It's life or death.
Yeah.
That the child is attached to the mother. So the quality of that attachment lives inside the body of every 6, 7, 8, 9-month-old infant. And then there's a foundation built for that child to receive other attachment experiences. And face it, like not too many mothers are completely present and without conflict and without anxiety and depression and history of ancestral generational trauma that is sitting right there in her body while she's holding the body of her child. And all of that translates and transfers into the child as, and I'll say like at the very tiny little place in the center of the heart, that's an image, here's how I attach. So if that's insecure, if mother's like checking out at times, and then daddy steps in because the father counts, but not in that first year, that as there's an expansion into the family unit, dad's neurosis gets connected to how the child relates to others, but it's on top of the foundation at 6 months. Then the sibling unit, even if it's a sibling unit of one, acts on the child. See, everything builds, and it starts with a connection at 6 months. So what happens in the structure of the psyche is I've got this unconscious space. The wounds occur, but most of them get stored down here so I can function. Like I got to smile so I get mommy to feed me. Meanwhile, I've got a basement room where everything that is objectionable is stored, and they're triggered every time an attachment comes along. So now I'm on the playground, and how I interact with my friends, the connections and the insecurities there are a reflection of that attachment. Right then, young adult, I could go on and on and on. I could talk forever about this, but you get the point. The point is that every single way we respond to attachment, so think our primary relationships are colored by those wounds. So when they're unconscious, you don't know that dark, scary space that you've shoved into a room. You're behaving in ways that you think are just who you are, not recognizing that the choice you're making isn't coming from this place. It's coming from the wound. That's like saying, I know I shouldn't send this text. Boom.
And I'm sending it anyway.
Well, what is it? There's a drive to act and behave out of the insecurity of the attachment that then becomes like real life for the person who's having that experience when that's not really true. You know, the person who will fantasize quietly that the reason they're, the person they're dating isn't texting them back. I had a friend last night, the guy he's dating texted him, fuck off. Now, the man was responding to a spam bot text, but it accidentally got sent to my friend. Now, it got righted immediately, and we all know, and he knew, is like, but the thoughts this man had for like the 2 or 3 minutes before it was righted was a real bona fide fantasy of, oh my God, what did I do wrong? That comes from the wounded places. And so if you don't go into that room, by the way, smells like poop and shame and
Yes.
who wants
Yes.
to get right? But if we don't, then the behaviors, text, operate from an unconscious wounded place, right? So
Right.
we've got to go look at, and so when I teach that class, we kind of teach everybody what attachment is, and then we like start at the adult experience of attachment. We work back chronologically to find different wounded moments to like visit in like guided hypnosis to have a healing so that we can then get back. The whole class is designed to get someone back to their 9-month-old self.
Mm.
6 months is where the individuation happens. So that's
Right.
why it's after 6 months and before the likely core wounds that would happen,
Yeah.
right? That at 9 months, you're the most secure you can be based on who you are, who your parents were, and what
Amazing.
happened in the crucible, right?
Yeah.
So every I think this is sometimes hard for people to get, but as a psychologist, I believe this with every ounce of me. Also because I'm a human being who's done the work.
Yes.
Every
I was just going to say that.
interaction with everybody in my intimate life can be described by the attachment consciousness that was installed into me, much of which is wounded and challenged. And so it's been decades of unpacking. And I'm here to
Yeah.
say, since we've been talking, everybody listening, if we've been talking about all of this challenge and wound, I get to live in a body that I call wound free.
Yes.
Like I've
Yeah.
healed the wounds. They're not attached to behavior. Now, in case you think I'm saying I walk on water, I don't, because I still have a
Right.
personality.
There's
I
an
have an
imperfection to all
unconscious.
of us.
Yes. I
Absolutely.
can still be
Absolutely.
triggered by unconscious
Yes.
stuff. And I have an anger challenge, which, by the way,
Right.
is very accurately described in my natal chart.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's so compelling, for me personally to look at it, wanting to, it's like to dive in, to look at
Yeah.
those synchronicities of experiences and how they correlate to that earlier wounding
Yeah.
at the 6 months. Like it's just compelling for me just to say, okay, I need to discover more about myself.
Yes.
And when we look at it in context of this, is to really recognize that it is what has shaped our experiences, our belief about what is possible for ourselves, what we believe we're worthy of. All of that is
Yep.
one major contributing factor to our ability to really come into the state of more wholesomeness,
That's
and
right.
as you said, to be wound free. And this is what I love about you as well, Michael, is you're not someone who just has all this knowledge that you're talking about. It's, you've walked through this, you've done the deeper
Oh,
work,
yeah.
you know the impact
Yeah.
of how it has transformed and supported you in your life. And now you're just taking this forward and saying, here you go. Here are the tools. Here is the wisdom for you to start to enact and take
Yep.
responsibility for within your own life. And it's powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. So I want to move forward. Of course, when time goes by so very quickly, and of course in these conversations.
Yeah.
But I want to look at a couple of things. One of them, of course, just quickly looking at this aspect of dreams, and so
Mm,
dreams become really are a pathway for us. I'd love if you could explain that relationship that
yeah.
we have. Do you know when are we having a dream where there's guidance versus when there is something emotionally that
Yeah.
we're having to contend with?
So, one of the interesting things about my life is that there is this intersection between dreaming and astrology. And I've often sort of been looking for the language to describe, well, why is that? How do they relate? And so they do relate through my little, your tagline the way through. Mine is your ambassador to conscious embodiment. I will help you understand how to be in a body here in this place. And dreams are about the inner outer space, if you will,
Okay.
and astrology is about the outer space.
Mhm.
So to me, it's all about the unconscious, that there's this vast unconscious, and astrology reflects that that would be outer space where we don't
Yeah.
know, it's just right, to our embodied consciousness, where it's like I'm participating and there's this outer reflection that I can use to contextualize how a cycle feels, what to do here. Is it a breakdown moment? Is it a flow moment? Because the material in that upper unconscious collective place is reflective of our journey. So is the inner unconscious that we only access when we're asleep. So we can look up and access the unconscious in that sort of image way. But in order to look at the inner outer space, we have to be asleep. And when we are, we're connected, because the disconnected mental mind that says I'm separate from this is also asleep. So we get to be in the available psyche, just like the transits at any given moment inform what's what. So do the dream conflicts. So your question is, like, how do you know which one? Well, I will say that in the beginning of my work in my 20s, it was every single one. Right? That becomes important to allow people to do, that it's okay to feel like you need to write down every dream and read everything you've written and maybe talk about it and, do that. What happens, I think, when you're cooking with gas in this process is you just know when a dream needs to be worked on, because it'll have a vibrance to it that will get your attention. And so what I want to make sure that everybody understands is that reasons why nightmares are so memorable is that we're not really interested in the dream where we're like flying and fabulous and all is well. We're interested in where dreams are telling us we're frightened, where dreams are telling us we're having a stress response, so that we can wake up and do life on life's terms the next day. But if you look at those moments when the nightmare consciousness has you remembering the dream, halfway through the day, that's a dream that might want to be looked at.
Right.
So you get to know the desire that the dream has for you after spending a lot of time dancing with your dreams.
Yeah.
So I do think there has to be a growth, and a skill has to develop before you can really easily discern. So if you feel like if you're listening in, you want to pay more attention to, just do that. Just do that and pay attention to every single one of them. And eventually you'll start to vibe with the ones that really need some attention.
Yes, yes. So good, so good. Oh my gosh, we could have a whole show just dedicated to understanding dreams and the invitations in there as well. I think it's another way to begin to understand of how we are supported and how we are held and helped even in those unconscious times, in being able to take a look at what's going on inside of us that needs to be tended to. Yeah.
And we're in a wild moment on the planet that's very stressful just to be alive in the world today. And so that's a stressful act that all of us have to engage in and somehow keep a normalized sense of building our individual lives while being fed every day conflict and frightening experiences that are real and burgeoning around the world. So having a kind of routine of allowing scary big dreams to get your attention in your waking life, those dreams are happening at moments when you are not in flow and smooth relationship to your inside or your outside. Wouldn't that be good to know? So that when the unconscious through dreams is telling you, stop for a moment and look at what's troubling you, rather than skate through your obligations, pretending that you're not actually troubled in your unconscious.
Right, right. Oh my God. Brilliant, brilliant. Just in honoring your time and in everything, Michael, of course, I could hang out with you all day and have these conversations. I know neither one of us have time for that.
Have time for that.
However, that being said, I want to just quickly revisit something that you shared during one of your Red Robe astrology vlogs on Instagram. And for people tuning in, this is a great way. This is how I get my juice in my coffee in the morning, is listening to Michael's wisdom of the day. And one of the things that you had shared back in November, or just as we were coming out of November into December, you mentioned that November was a precursor to what is the upcoming year. And I know that you've got a forecast coming up, but can you elaborate a little bit on that in terms of what are our invitations here?
Yeah, November certainly was this, and I will say that not just November, but I'll this is the sort of message, the meaning behind that message in November, that we're in preparatory land. When planets change signs, when outer planets change signs, big changes happen on the planet. We have a very rare experience in 25 and 26 because we've got three of the outer planets, because there's only three of them, all of the outer planets are changing signs at essentially the same time. And that's enormous for us on the planet in the collective. Just looking at Pluto, who has been moving back and forth out of the end of Capricorn and the beginning of Aquarius for 2 years. He entered Aquarius just in the last couple of months for the third and final, or the fifth and final time, where he'll be for the next couple of decades. And bam, immediately Pluto, change and transformation, death and rebirth. Aquarius, the new world order that we're creating. The United States unfolding, that goes without saying. The wars everywhere escalating, things that are new, that were crazy, like what's happening over in this part of the world and that part of the world just in the last month or two. Everything is amplified. Look at the technology that got amplified. There's this freaking chip that can, like, Google made a chip that's enormous. So I'm sharing that with you so your audience understands when planets change signs, when outer planets change signs, big things happen on the planet. When Uranus moved into Aries was, there was an oil rig that blew up in the Gulf of Mexico. It was huge. When Pluto moved into Capricorn in 2007 and 8, we had a recession because Capricorn rules structures and Pluto kills old structures. Anyway, I'm talking too much. The point is that Pluto's in Aquarius, Uranus is going to move into Gemini, and Neptune's going to move into Aries. Pluto, slow change. Uranus, fast change. Neptune, ideologies and belief systems moving into the fiery sign of war, Aries, air and fire. There is going to be an acceleration of reaction, violence, chaos from these ingresses, both in the summer of 25 as a highlight and 26 as well, these formations. This is going to be radical. And you don't need an astrologer really to tell you that that's true. Like anybody who's watching the news knows that next year and the year after are going to be hard. I'm telling you, the astrology backs that up. November and the eclipse season that led into November was transformative, not only because eclipses transform us, but November is Scorpio season. Scorpio is the ruler, is the sign that Pluto rules, because it's the sign of death and rebirth, change and transformation. So we've been moving through not only these crazy like black moons, 2 new moons in November, and the eclipses and all of this juicy inner change and transformation energy. Right now, both Mars and Mercury are retrograde, and that started in November. So retrograde processes for the personal planets are like that consciousness dipping into the unconscious. That's my language for it. Mercury is the talk, Mars is the walk. Yeah. So now here I'm getting to the juicy value and what I mean. We're being prepared both by the Scorpionian energy of change and transformation, the eclipse's capacity to transform not only who we are, but where we're going and what direction we're walking in. And now the walk and talk planet saying, nope, we got to reinvent how we walk and how we talk. As we have this live, those two retrograding planets are trining each other, meaning that Mars in the unconscious is working well with Mercury in the unconscious to help us all get our walk and our talk not only in alignment with each other, but in a higher level of consciousness, because the shit show hasn't even started in terms of change. Right. And it already looks like a lot of scary change. So in order to meet the demands of next year, we've been being taken through what I would call masterclass availability of shadow work and self-examination at a personal level. How am I thinking and perceiving in this world that's scaring the shit out of me every day? And how am I walking in a way that can help? Right. Mars in Leo is about centering self outside in the world, but he backtracks into Cancer, where we have to rest and prepare. So the message of our walk is walk bold and out there loud, but don't forget to retreat and care for self forever,
Yes.
or you will never make the walk without doing that. That's what Mars is teaching us. And Mercury is retrograde in the sign of Sagittarius, which is highest truth.
Yeah.
So our perceptions are shifting so that we can more easily perceive a higher truth. The truth is interesting because there's no such thing. There's
Right.
my truth, there's your truth, there's objective
Exactly.
truth. It's like, what? But there is a truth archetype with a capital T, and Sagittarius invented that. Walk and talk in process that then leads us into 2025, changed and transformed and more healed, and therefore readier to take on a world that's changing as much as it will in the next
Mhm.
2 years.
Oh my gosh, Michael, thank you. I know that's a lot to kind of capitalize on in terms of these last few minutes that we've been
Mm.
together. I want to take a moment, though, for those of you tuning in who, I mean, thank you, Michael, for your wisdom and sharing. And, please, by all means, get in touch with him. I highly encourage
Thank you.
you to explore his classes and get in, look at those offerings, the offerings and opportunities available to you, to me, through this amazing work that he does. So his website, I'm going to say if we can get that pulled up here. There we go, michaellennox.com for those of you that are in. Michael, any closing words, anything that you'd like to share in terms of your work or something coming
No,
up?
I'd love two things actually. One is that I do an astro overview for 2025. I do it live on New Year's Day, but you can use the recording. There's tremendous handouts. This year, like 15 pages of handouts and schedules. And so tune into that. It's $26.99. You can buy the seat on my website. It's a great way to prepare for next year. But I also do a daily written email subscription series called the Daily Astro Alerts. My Red Robe Astrology videos are based on the outline from the very detailed written description of the daily transits. This is how I learned the most about astrology. Was my teacher did this in the 90s. So I've got a 1 month free for all you folks. If you go to michaellennox.com and look for the Daily Astro Alerts and click to purchase and use the code Namaste30, you get a free month. You'll have to sign up. You'll get the free for them. Then they'll ask if you want to continue, and you'll continue or not. If you like them, you'll continue. If they're too dense for you, you won't. But check it out, Namaste 30 for that. And I hope to see some of you in my Astro overview for 2025.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, Michael, thank you so very much for being here, for sharing that. And I really want to back that. I've been, it's a great, those astro reports that you offer are such
Thank you.
great wisdom and information and have really significantly helped me in being able to find my way through, the challenges for myself personally. So thank you, Michael. And thank you to everyone who's been tuning in today. It's been a pleasure to hang out and enjoy this conversation. If there is something that was shared here today, by all means, please feel free to share with a friend. Please comment and get this episode and this wisdom out there. Of course, we all have a responsibility, as Michael said, and sometimes that is about being able to share and make this wisdom and this information available to those who you love and care for too. So, all right, everyone, God bless. Until we meet again next week. Bye-bye for now.